Good morning. I'm Nova Blake, and this is your complete political briefing for Saturday, April 18th, 2026. Today, Iran declares the Strait of Hormuz fully open, oil prices crash by 10%, and the Dow Jones soars more than 1,000 points on hopes the war is finally ending. Let's get into it. Starting with the top stories from across the American political landscape. Iran declared the Strait of Hormuz completely open for all commercial vessels on Friday morning, and the financial markets erupted. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi posted on social media that passage through the strait is declared completely open in line with the Lebanon ceasefire, and United States oil prices immediately plummeted 10.8% to $81.38 per barrel, the steepest single-day energy price drop in recent memory. The Dow Jones Industrial Average soared nearly 1,000 points. The S&P 500 leaped 1.3% toward fresh record highs, and airline stocks surged as much as 9%, as investors priced in the possibility of the first meaningful end to the Iran war supply shock since fighting began on February 28th. President Trump announced hours after the Strait of Hormuz declaration that the United States naval blockade of Iranian ports remains fully in force and will stay that way until a permanent peace deal is signed. Trump posted on social media that the blockade would not be lifted, but added that a final agreement should go very quickly, saying in capital letters that most of the points are already negotiated. The original 2-week ceasefire between the United States and Iran is set to expire on April 22nd, and the administration is expressing cautious optimism that a second round of direct negotiations, possibly as early as this weekend, could produce a lasting framework. Progressive Democrat Analilia Mejia won Thursday's special election in New Jersey's 11th congressional district by approximately 20 points, defeating Republican Joe Hathaway in a race watched closely as a barometer of national political sentiment. Mejia, a former union organizer and national political director for Senator Bernie Sanders in 2020, replaces Mikey Sherrill, who vacated the seat after being elected New Jersey governor last November. Her victory narrows Republicans' razor-thin House majority to 218 to 214, meaning House Speaker Mike Johnson can now afford only a single Republican defection on any party line vote, further tightening his grip on a Congress already straining under the weight of the Iran war. Congress passed a temporary 10-day extension of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, hours before the surveillance authority was set to expire, after a chaotic late-night session that saw 2 longer-term extensions fail on the House floor. The House voted in a voice vote after 2 a.m. Thursday, and the Senate unanimously approved the extension Friday morning in a rare Friday session. Section 702 allows the United States government to intercept the electronic communications of foreign nationals abroad without a warrant, and its expiration was seen as a national security threat during an active wartime period. The stopgap extends the authority only through April 30th, giving Congress 2 weeks to resolve a standoff between privacy reformers and national security hawks over whether the program can spy on Americans' communications without judicial approval. Republican Senators Susan Collins of Maine and Tom Tillis of North Carolina publicly signaled this week that they will demand an authorization for use of military force, or AUMF, if the Iran war reaches its 60-day mark on April 29th and is not winding down. Collins said in a statement that if this conflict exceeds the 60 days specified in the War Powers Act, or if the president deploys troops on the ground, Congress should have to authorize those actions. Tillis said the administration would be wise to put together a well-founded authorization of military force and a funding strategy. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska is separately working on a resolution that would authorize continued military operations beyond the 60-day mark, while placing guardrails on the scope of the conflict. Acting Immigration and Customs Enforcement Director Todd Lyons announced Thursday he will resign effective May 31st, Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin confirmed. Lyons was the primary executor of the Trump administration's mass deportation agenda, overseeing the sweeping raids, deportations, and enforcement operations that defined the administration's first year and a half in office. His departure adds to a growing list of recent personnel changes across the Department of Homeland Security, following the earlier ousters of Secretary Kristi Noem and Attorney General Pam Bondi. Mullen praised Lyons in a statement, saying American communities are safer because of his leadership. The House voted Thursday, April 17th, to pass a bill extending temporary protected status, or TPS, for eligible Haitian immigrants through 2029, with 10 Republicans crossing party lines to support the measure. The bill passed the full chamber one day after clearing a procedural hurdle through a discharge petition led by Representative Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts. The measure now faces an uphill battle in the Senate, and the White House has already promised to veto it. The vote represents one of the most significant bipartisan breaks from Trump's immigration enforcement agenda this session, and Democrats are framing it as evidence that the president's grip on the House is loosening ahead of the November midterms. Two key Senate Republicans signaled a potential shift in their posture on the Iran war this week, a notable fracture in the wall of Republican support that has sustained the conflict for nearly 50 days. Senator Collins said the war cannot continue without congressional authorization once the 60-day clock expires, while Senator Murkowski separately said there is no question that the president should have sought authorization from Congress before striking Iran on this scale. The signals carry significant weight because both senators have previously voted against Democratic war powers resolutions, and their defection on an eventual AUMF vote could determine whether Congress formally authorizes or curtails the conflict. A federal judge on Thursday halted all above-ground construction of the White House ballroom, a project the Trump administration has been pursuing at the complex, ordering an immediate stop to the work amid ongoing litigation. The ruling represented the second time a court has blocked the controversial construction project this year, following the administration's earlier appeal of a similar order. Construction of the ballroom, which is taking place in the old executive office building adjacent to the White House, has been a source of persistent legal and political controversy. Trump attacked the judge on social media shortly after the ruling. The Democratic Party extended its string of strong special election performances Thursday, with Mejia's roughly 20-point victory in New Jersey, continuing a trend of significant Democratic overperformance compared to 2024 presidential election baselines. Democrats have outperformed their 2024 margins by an average of 18 points across 6 special elections held since Trump began his second term, according to analysts tracking the results. Republican strategists are increasingly alarmed that the combination of the Iran war's economic fallout, elevated gas prices, and the administration's immigration enforcement actions are driving the political winds strongly in Democrats' favor heading into the November midterm elections. Now turning to Washington and the latest actions from the current administration. Here are 10 significant developments from the administration this week. President Trump announced Friday that the United States naval blockade of Iranian ports remains fully in force despite Iran declaring the Strait of Hormuz open for commercial vessels. Trump said on social media that the blockade will not be lifted until both sides reach a deal on the war. He simultaneously expressed optimism that a final agreement is close, saying most points are already negotiated. The combination of Iran's Strait of Hormuz reopening declaration and the White House's blockade statement reflects the fluid and precarious diplomatic state of the ceasefire, which expires April 22nd. The Trump administration accepted the resignation of acting Immigration and Customs Enforcement Director Todd Lyons on Thursday, with Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin confirming Lyons will depart on May 31st. Lyons had overseen the most aggressive immigration enforcement period in American history, including the raids, deportations, and enforcement escalation that have been the hallmark of the administration's domestic policy. No replacement has been announced. Lyons's departure follows a series of high-profile leadership changes across DHS and the broader national security apparatus. Congress, under pressure from the White House and national security officials, passed a 10-day extension of FISA Section 702 in a chaotic, late-night House session Thursday that saw 2 longer-term proposals fail. The Senate unanimously approved the stopgap Friday morning. President Trump had personally urged Republican unity behind the surveillance tool, writing on social media that the military desperately needs FISA 702 to protect troops overseas and Americans at home. The temporary extension punts the broader debate over whether the program requires a warrant to query Americans' data to the week of April 28th. The administration's Iran war supplemental funding request, estimated to total between $80 billion and $100 billion, is expected to be formally transmitted to Congress as the war approaches its 60-day statutory deadline under the War Powers Resolution on April 29th. Republican lawmakers, including Senators Tillis and Collins, have signaled they will tie authorization of additional funding to a formal congressional authorization of the conflict itself. The White House is navigating a delicate path between securing the funding it needs to sustain military operations and the political cost of a formal AUMF debate that could expose divisions within the Republican Party. The Iran war naval blockade continued its fourth day of enforcement on Friday, with the United States military operating more than 10,000 sailors, Marines, and airmen, along with a dozen warships and dozens of aircraft, to intercept shipping bound to or from Iranian ports. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi's announcement that commercial passage through the Strait of Hormuz was open prompted oil prices to drop more than 10% globally, a sign of how central the strait's status has become to global energy markets. The administration characterized the Strait announcement as a partial victory, while insisting the blockade remains in place until a full deal is finalized. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent continued the administration's economic warfare campaign against Iran this week, with the Treasury Department's expanded secondary sanctions targeting Chinese banks and Gulf financial institutions that handle Iranian funds remaining in active enforcement. 2 Chinese banks have received formal warnings. Bessent said separately that he is optimistic gas prices could fall to around $3 per gallon between June and September if the Iran situation resolves, providing political relief for Republicans ahead of summer driving season and November elections. The administration moved this week to nominate Erica Schwartz, a former Deputy United States Surgeon General, to serve as Director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The CDC has been without a permanent director since Secretary Kennedy fired the previous head of the agency last year. The nomination comes as the United States is managing its worst measles outbreak in a generation, driven in part by declining vaccination rates, and as Kennedy faces 7 congressional hearings over his management of the Department of Health and Human Services. A federal judge ruled Thursday that all above-ground construction on the White House ballroom project must immediately stop for the second time this year. The ruling continues a pattern of judicial resistance to the Trump administration's plans to renovate and expand facilities at and near the White House complex. The administration had previously argued in court filings that the president's security required allowing construction to continue. Trump publicly criticized the judge on social media following the ruling. The Department of Justice continued its effort this week to vacate the seditious conspiracy convictions of 12 Proud Boys and Oath Keepers leaders who participated in the January 6, 2021 attack on the United States Capitol. The filing, made to the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, asks the court to erase the guilty verdicts with prejudice, meaning the cases could never be brought again. The appeals court has not yet ruled on the government's request. Democratic lawmakers, including House Judiciary Ranking Member Jamie Raskin, have called the motion an appalling attempt to rewrite the history of January 6th. The administration is weighing the legal and strategic implications of approaching the Iran war's 60-day war powers deadline on April 29th without a peace deal in place. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 requires the president to end military operations or secure congressional authorization by that date. White House officials have suggested the 60-day clock could be extended by 30 additional days under the law's provisions. But Republican senators, including Tillis, have made clear they expect either a credible exit plan or a formal AUMF vote as the deadline approaches, setting up a potential constitutional confrontation between Congress and the executive branch in the coming weeks. That's your full briefing for Saturday, April 18th, 2026. I'm Nova Blake. Stay informed, stay ahead. We'll see you next time.